Welcome back. Now, normally, when it's bright out like that, and there's a little bit of glare on the board, I would drop the blinds. But there's a bunny right there in the window. He's really chill. So, for bunny reasons, there's the glare right here. All right. So I want to talk about basically stuff that I've come to learn, stuff that I maybe already knew on some level, but having my own channel, it's really come into focus. And I wanted to come up with 10 topics, and I wanted to try to make them flow together as well as possible. So, minus a script of any sort, let's go through the 10 topics. I want to start with prospects. I learned pretty early on with the channel, any speculation on the future of prospects and what they might be able to do and how good they might be, basically keep it as rosy as possible. Fans are very, it's weird because fans love their prospects until they're in the NHL. So you could have like, I'm really excited about this defenseman coming up. I can't wait. This guy's going to be great. And then his first game in there, there's a couple of bad defensive plays. One of them ends up in your own net. All right, still excited. And then if like a month later he's still making some defensive errors, I don't know. I don't know if this guy's ever going to be what we thought. I don't know. Maybe it's time to get rid of him. And honestly, with defensemen, it can take a while longer. Goaltenders, it can take a while longer. And some forwards, usually forwards are more likely to come in and take over right away, although there's been some recent defensemen. Cale Makar comes to mind. Quinn Hughes is another, who they're fantastic. Maurice Sider right now in Detroit, right? So in discussing prospects, I learned pretty early on, make it as rosy as possible. My opinion on who may or may not bust is not important. Just keep that completely out. And and make sure I have as many notes from scouts and from different scouting websites as possible when I talk about prospects. And that's something I've learned over the years. And it's interesting because to me, prospects, it's a real hit and miss thing. If a guy plays in the NHL, to me, that's a measure of success, even if they never become what they were supposed to be. But there will always be that, the guy's a bum, he's no good kind of talk that's out there. Goaltenders. The interesting thing with goaltenders is I always knew that a starter versus backup, the backup's going to be the most popular player on the team. Although I think that's changed a bit in recent years too. I don't hear as many calls for, well, this backup should be playing more than the starter as we used to. I think fans are getting a little smarter in understanding how the game works. So if a backup has 2 or 3 good games, you don't see as many posts about, hey, that guy's much better than the starter, so the starter should be gone. But it's interesting with goalies too, because it really is about how you're playing over your last 2 or 3 games. And it is so interesting to me how quickly people will go from saying this goaltender's really good to, yeah, he's overrated, he's not very good. And it's usually a couple of games away. I do feel bad for goaltenders too, because they are the last line of defense. And if the puck gets past them, there's not the forgiveness that a defenseman might get. Defenseman could get bailed out by the goaltender. Forward makes a dumb move. Well, if the turnover takes place, defenseman can bail him out. One of the other forwards can bail him out. Goaltender can bail him out. Goalie makes a mistake, he's a bum. He's terrible, right? So it feels like we're seeing a lot of that these days, right? So it is interesting because goaltenders and prospects to me are the 2 biggest topics that will definitely draw a lot of discussion and a lot of arguing. And I've always found it interesting when somebody, the day that a player gets drafted, you will see in the comments, he's a bust. Got drafted today. What happened since the draft? Was he in a car accident? Like, what happened since the draft? What in the world? What did he fail a physical right after the draft? Are they rescinding the draft pick? Like, it's so weird to me. But there's also that side of, okay, if I put this post up now, we can go back to it in 4 years, and I can say, I told you he was a bust. And that seems to be about the shelf life for prospects. It's about 3 or 4 years. And then they go from prospect to project. And it's interesting, too, in having the channel and watching the comment section, how quickly fans will go from, I really think that guy's going to be good, he just needs another year of development, he's going to be fine, to, yeah, no, he's not an NHLer, he's done. No, it's finished, it's gone, it's done. And I understand that at the NHL level, that happens at some level, too, where a player might be 23 years of age, which is young. And yet NHL teams will be like, yeah, he's never going to make it, so we're going to have to move on to somebody else. And it's like somebody who's 23 is never going to learn to play hockey better. It's so weird to me. I get it. You've only got a certain amount of money for your development and you know, all your training stuff, and you want to put that into your younger prospects who you think have a higher ceiling. But it's odd to me. Power rankings. So I talked about this in videos recently and all that. I know that when a team goes on a 2, 3, 4, 5 game winning streak, the immediate expectation is, well, we're top 10. And that right now in the NHL, and I'll come back to this, right now in the NHL, because of the way that the standings are set up, because of the way the point system is set up, there are a lot of teams with really gaudy, fantastic records right now, right? So really good records, look excellent, look fantastic. How many of them actually are, we'll know in the playoffs, right? So it looks like we're going to again have a season of maybe as many as 10 teams with 100-plus points, maybe 12, 13. And I'm old enough to remember when 100 points, you might get one team that gets that many. And it's because they didn't have that system for points back then. And it was, again, I'll come back to it. But when I'm doing the power rankings, again, it's a day-to-day thing. So I don't, at the end of the day, say, okay, this team needs to go way up, this team needs to go way down. There are adjustments that I make where during midweek I'll say, you know, this team needs to drop or this team needs to go up, but it's rare. And it's interesting too because, again, over the 4 years I've done power rankings, I think it's 3-4 years I've done power rankings, there's always been the, well, you're favoring this, you're not favoring this, well, clearly you're too hard on this team, you're too easy on this team, and I have to just let that all slide. I learned pretty quickly with power rankings. I have to let it all slide because I'm trying to think of how many different teams. That'd be a fun video to do, go through all my power rankings ever and come up with these teams have never been number one. These teams have never been at the bottom. But I don't know that I have the energy for that. So it's just a fun idea that I don't know that it ever actually happens. So trades. Trades are always interesting to me. So when a trade takes place, I will usually, if it's an important deal, I definitely will. But if it's one of those trades that just fades into like a news of the day, like today where Lafferty gets traded for a Nylander, I'm not going to worry about which jersey I'm wearing. But I'll wear the jersey of the team that I think got the best player. The team that I think, at least right now, has probably won that deal. But one thing I don't do is winners and losers. Winners and losers. Trade deadline being a good example of that too. I've never done a video of here's who I think won or lost trade deadline day. The closest I will get is to say, I think this team made some good moves today. And that's about it. You know, and I will always throw in that caveat of, yes, and we'll see. We will see when we, and because again, that's absolutely accurate. We've seen so many trades that have taken place. We've said, wow, they added that guy. That's going to be great. They're really favorites for the cup. And then that team goes out in the first round. And it can be just shocking to watch where you're like, okay, this is all going to work. And game one, it doesn't, wow, these lines don't work. He doesn't fit in at all with the system there. And then people will look back later and say, see, I knew that wasn't going to work, which is one of my favorites. I always knew. Oh, okay, cool, good, awesome. We don't give out crowns on the internet. Not for that anyways. So trades are always entertaining to me, and it's kind of a shame this year that we haven't seen the trades that we will during a normal regular season, which we were really thinking we were getting this year, and then we kind of didn't because there's a flat cap, there's the escrow, half the teams are above or right at the cap, so yeah, it becomes a little tougher to make trades. Hopefully that fixes itself soon. I don't know who I'm kidding with that because GMs will spend to the cap, and then when the season starts, and they're like, we need to fix this. Why don't we have any cap space? Right, I spent all that money. Well, at least we got that guy, right? What do you mean the fans are calling him a bum? Anyways, and that brings us to contracts. Contracts are always interesting because when a contract gets signed, there are people who will immediately, I love that contract. And then you'll also have people immediately, that's way too much money. And I think the most divisive ones might be on defensemen because what one person thinks makes a good defenseman may be completely different from somebody else. You might be of the mind that if a defenseman doesn't score points, well, then you can replace them easily, right? Yeah, that guy's a good defensive defenseman, but you can probably replace him for way cheaper. He's not worth that amount of money. And then with forwards, when they get the contracts, or even goaltenders, on the forward front, the argument will be, well, that contract, he got that because he plays on that line, or he plays on this team, and this team scores a lot of goals, so he gets more money, which may or may not be true, but you can only pay them based on what they do. And with goaltenders, coming back to this, it'll be his contract is good because he's a very good goaltender, or that contract's bad because, yeah, he's got really good numbers, but look at the team he's on. So they could easily replace him. And I think we've seen, I mentioned this in the video yesterday too, I think we've started to see general managers being more willing to walk away from giving long-term extensions at big cap hits to veteran players. And I think, honestly, while it's tough for us as fans that we don't like to see veteran players leave teams, we hate to see like our favorite guy for 10 years and he's gone somewhere else. It honestly is, history has shown that's probably the smartest move, to let those players go and take that cap money that you save by not spending it on that veteran and spend it on somebody else. But there will always be that, oh, they let that guy go, they're going to regret that. And then the guy they got back, he's not as good. So even though the guy they got back, the guy they signed to a contract, is making maybe 3 or 4 million less than the guy they let go, the argument's going to be, well, it doesn't matter because they downgraded, even though they have an extra $3 or $4 million to play with as well, where they can upgrade elsewhere. The other thing that I've found interesting, just for me on this channel, is that when I choose a jersey, there will always be the debate about why. So I wore Montreal for this, because sure, why not? Because there's always that debate of, is he trying to jinx them? So you're wearing a lot of that. Why don't you wear this team? Well, why isn't this team being, well, what about that team? And I find it odd, because when I go to make a video, I don't really think too much about which jersey I'm going to wear. So if it's a news video, as I posted earlier, and it's got a preview in it, I'll say, all right, I have to wear one of the teams that's playing tonight for the preview. And I have that in my mind, because if I don't, people are going to be like, well, why isn't he wearing a jersey of a team that's in the preview? Does he not like any of them? Because that will be the discussion. And then when I do power rankings, usually the jersey I choose is of one of the big risers that week, where I'll say, okay, who had a really good week that's really, going up right now, and then I'll wear that jersey usually, which doesn't tip my hand really, because people should be aware, okay, this team's going to go up because they had a really good week. Now I want to come back to the 3-point system. The 3-point system works as intended. People talk about they should give 3 points for a win in regulation, and 2 points for overtime, and 1 point for a shootout win. That would be great and fine and dandy, but the current NHL system means that if you lose 8 games in overtime or shootouts, that's in the third column. So a team is 16, 11, and 8. They're 5 games above 500. Now, if you just went wins and losses, they're 16 and 19. One of those records looks not bad. One of those records looks not great. And so it purely is for looks. It really is. Like a lot of teams right now that are putting up these gaudy numbers right now, records wise, a lot of them have maybe a bunch of overtime or shootout loss points, which absolutely makes them look probably better than what they are at this stage of the game. So I think the 3-point system is designed to work that way, where if you have a rough week, but if you're able to make those losses take place in overtime or in shootouts, people aren't necessarily panicking, and you look at the standings and you're not dropping in the standings, you're not going up either. But it works. And I did a video, I was going to do a video, like I think it was 4 years ago now, where I was like, all right, if we make all these 3 points, all these 2 points, and all these 1 points, it's going to make a huge difference to the standings. And I think it flipped 2 teams. And so I ended up at the end of that saying, you know what? It really wouldn't make that much of a difference. I have never heard the NHL thinking about having 3 points for regulation win. I do think regulation wins are more impressive than overtime or shootout wins. Overtime win, you're in a 3-on-3, which very often is a back and forth. And sometimes there's some luck. I would say luck is more likely to be involved in who ends up winning that overtime game. You're more likely to see the post at one end and the goal at the other. And then with shootouts, it really does come down to it's a skills competition, which is not a hockey play. So I know for me, that 3-point system works for the NHL. Shootouts, if you're there in person, they can be great. And sometimes if it's a team you cheer for or you don't cheer for, and you can be really into that. So if it's a team you don't like that's in a shootout, you can really cheer for the other team. But just speaking as somebody who watches every game I can, there are times where a shootout's kind of boring to me because I don't have any emotional investment in either team, and I'm like, oh, it's going to round 8. Come on, I just want this to be over, which shouldn't be the way that you feel while you're watching hockey. You shouldn't feel like you just want it to be done. And the interesting thing is, I never feel that way during the playoffs. During the playoffs and overtime, it can go to 5 overtimes. I'm still absolutely, I'm there. I am glued to the TV, and it doesn't matter at all who the teams are going to that 5th overtime. If you have, I'm just trying to think of 2 teams that I don't have an emotional investment in. So if it was like LA and San Jose, just using that as an example, and it's going to 5th overtime, I'm still there. Even if it's 1, 2 in the morning, I'm tired, but I'm still there. Now, there were times where when I had to get up and go to work at 4 or 5 in the morning, I might have to go to bed during an overtime, but I'd be very angry about it. I'd be thinking, if I could just call into work and find a reason to say hockey and then hang up the phone, that'd be great, but it doesn't work that way. I have to say, too, one thing from just, again, from the YouTube standpoint that I've got kind of a kick out of is the fair weather commenters, meaning that there are certain people who will comment on the channel, and either they'll be trolling every other fan base, or they'll be just, we're the greatest, and then when that team starts to have trouble, they're gone. And there are times where I'm like, I haven't seen that person in the comments, so I'll do a search, and I'm like, well, I haven't been on the channel in 4 months. Interesting, or at least they haven't commented in 4 months. That's interesting. And then as soon as things start to turn in favor of that team, they're back again. The rabbit needs to figure out a more graceful way to jump down. He's not very graceful, but he's okay. You'd know if he wasn't okay. But yeah, so fair weather commenters, I honestly I find it kind of interesting because, I mean, in real life that happens, where you have people that are, wearing the jersey and the hat and everything, and they're all excited, and then the team goes into a 5-game skid, and then they stop, and they're like, I knew they were bums. So it's weird to me that happens with YouTube comments too. Because for me, if I watch a channel, it doesn't really matter whether things are going right or wrong. I mean, even though I haven't enjoyed Doctor Who for ages, I still watch Doctor Who YouTube videos here and there. Doesn't make a difference. But anyways, yeah, it's odd. One thing too that I've seen, so the channel's been where it is now for about 5.5 years. It's built its way up, and I've paid closer attention to every player. It's one thing that I'm really grateful to be able to do with this channel, is that I'm able to pay more attention to a Rocco Grimaldi than I would have before I had a channel. I'm more able to pay attention to all these guys. And what has really stuck out to me is we talk a lot about how much money these guys make and how big of stars they are and all of this wonderful stuff, right? Which is true. There's a lot of guys who make big money. There are also a lot more guys who don't. There are a lot of players who come in as a prospect, say 5 years ago in 2016, and they're already out of the league and their career's considered to be finished. And they're in their mid-20s. It is shocking to me just how often this happens. And it's easy for us to forget this when we talk about how much money these guys make and how rich they are, that the rich guys, the ones that are, able to do this for 10, 15 years, they're kind of the exceptions. Most hockey players have a short run. And so I find myself more excited for players. This year, Justin Danforth's a good example out of Columbus, where a guy comes into the league very late. I don't know if this is his only year in the NHL. It could be. And he plays every shift like it might be his only year in the NHL, likely because he's a lot older than guys are normally when they come into the league, and I think he appreciates it. And so I find myself cheering for these players, even though I know that advanced stats for a lot of those players that I might be cheering for might be bad. And the general manager might view them as basically, that's the placeholder until we bring somebody else in, or, well, they're in there because we got a bunch of injuries. But careers are very short. I know the first time we went to an Abbotsford game here, and just looking at all the guys on the ice for both teams, for both Henderson, it was Henderson I saw the first time, and Henderson and Abbotsford, and just counting off all the guys that I knew from the NHL. And some of them, you'd had a lot of hype about, and now they're AHLers. And I have nothing but respect for guys who continue to play even after that NHL dream is likely done, where they're willing to play in the AHL, where the pay is much lower, and obviously the older they get, the less of a chance they're going to get, and they're kind of seen at the AHL level as, all right, can you help shepherd this guy along, and then we're going to bring him up. Whereas for some of those veterans, I'm sure they want to say to the general manager, who's ready to come up? Me. But since I'm 27, 28, you don't view me as being ready to come up, so I'm going to train this kid, and then you guys will bring them up. So I have a lot of respect for hockey players now, and I think I always did, but I think it's more than that. And then I wanted to close out with this. The one thing that I've learned over the last 5.5 years, there are fans that take things with their teams very, very seriously, with the league very, very seriously, on a level that I don't. Like, I've always, I mean, there have been times where a hockey team I cheer for might have broke my heart, whether it's Boston, Vancouver, or on some level Dallas. Dallas, it's always been kind of a, well, that sucks more than anything else. Vancouver, it's been real, pull your heart out and stomp on it kind of thing. Boston, I've had that experience too, but I'm always, I still find myself getting taken aback sometimes at just how much people take the hockey team's fortune or misfortune really, really seriously. It is really, really important to them that their team is better than that other team, because if anybody says that other team is better, oh boy, that's a paddling. I just, yeah, I'm not there. Like, if anybody ever said to me before I had the channel or anything, if anybody's ever said, Calgary's better than Vancouver, I'd go, all right, that's it. Okay. Or if Vancouver was way better than Calgary, I'd say, why do you think that? How do you think that? What? And then I'd want to have a conversation. And sometimes people don't want to have that conversation. They just want to make that statement and then, ninja dust and off they go. But yeah, there's really a lot of hockey fans that just, and I knew that was the case with football. I knew with football it's very tribal and everything else. Now, the interesting thing with that too is that sometimes that'll then get ascribed to me, where it's, well, clearly he's really upset because his team lost this week against so and so. I'm not. I mean, even if team I cheer for wins, I'll play like a song when they win. Sometimes I haven't done that with Boston in years. I'm doing that with Vancouver now. I'm still standing when they win a game. But if they lose, well, then they lose. And then I got a video to do usually right after, because the Vancouver game is usually one of the last games that's on. And then I've got to immediately fire up the camera. And within 3 minutes of them losing the game, I'm, giving the review and I'm doing my thing. And that's something that I learned early on. I couldn't be that fan for the Canucks because, again, I grew up in the 80s where they were terrible, mostly terrible. And then there was the 90s where good, terrible, back to terrible. And then the 2000s started out okay, got good, kind of terrible, and then got good again. Early 2010s, fantastic, and then terrible. So it's hard for me to get really, but the one thing it does too is that it means when somebody, and again, this is online, this is in real life, somebody goes, the Canucks suck, I go, yep. And anything else? Or yeah, historically they're terrible. Right now, mediocre, but trying to get there. But historically, pretty bad. No Stanley Cups, multiple Game 7s, never won a Stanley Cup Game 7. They're the only team in history to do. You're right. Yep, you're right. Yep. Mm-hmm. Because I've never been one to try to do like a victory lap if a team I cheer for wins, because they usually lose. That's just the thing. When we were in Vegas, I did a huge board on how I felt it was my fault that my team lost. So that's where that's at. But hey, if you're one of those really serious, hyper serious, everything is awesome or really falling apart, glad to see you here. Because again, they're all different types of fans, some more intense than others. I consider myself more mellow, but again, all that losing tends to dull that intensity. At some point you're like, this, I can't. I can't. So your emotional investment kind of drops. But that's me. So let me know your thoughts in the comment section below as always. Don't forget to hit like and subscribe if you're browsing your way through, you just happened upon this video. And I will add this as a postscript. The one thing I've learned as a YouTuber is that your revenues aren't tied as much to your view count as you might think. They are very much tied to ad rates, which is very wildly inconsistent, although it's more consistent now than it was, say, 3 years ago, where it'd go way up and then just nosedive, and you're like, but I got the same amount of views and I made way less money. That's how it works. They seem to have evened that out, but it's still a thing, which is why a lot of YouTubers will maybe take January off, that kind of thing. or a couple of weeks around the holidays. You go, that's nice. And in reality, sometimes I've cynically looked at it as, well, they're not making anywhere near as much money. So they made all those videos at the start of December, and now they've made enough to cover those 2 weeks are taken off. But again, that's me being cynical. That it is possible. I do sometimes get cynical. Not often, but I do. Thank you guys for all your support. I will talk to you again soon.